like scary movies? Probably. I mean, you clicked on this video, didn't you? Whether you're a fan of this monster of a franchise started by the Wayans and taken over by one of the creative forces behind Airplane and the Naked Gun, or you simply like all the horror films that the scary movies lampoon.
Oh my god, I'm gonna die next Monday?
Yes. No, wait, Monday? That would be 7 business days. This is 7 days starting now.
There's something in this video for everyone. So join ScreenRant as we go through these 25 things you may have missed in the scary movie franchise. Of all the films parodied by the scary movies, the one that has the closest connection to the first spoof film is Scream. Which is ironic since Scream is already a tongue-in-cheek, self-aware slasher flick that references the classic horror movies that came before it. Also, hey, it's interesting to note that Scream's working title before they settled on Scream was Scary Movie. How's that for irony? Is it irony? Is it a coincidence? I always mix those two up. Not only that, but it seems like everyone in the late 90s and early 2000s was trying to spoof Scream. Dimension Films, which also produced Scream, bought both the Wayans idea and a parody written by another creative team. Not only did this purchase save the Wayans brothers' film from getting its thunder stolen by a rival movie, it also saved the studio from any potential lawsuits. The title of that rival movie was Scream If I Know What You Did Last Halloween. If you think that's convoluted, it is much simpler than the Wayans' original idea for the scary movie title. Last summer, I screamed because Friday the 13th fell on Halloween. That title is almost longer than Scary Movie's runtime. Since it was released at the turn of the century, around the time of an even bigger and more thought-provoking hit released, The Matrix, there are some nods to that sci-fi techno and leather-filled film in the first Scary Movie. But this sequence doesn't appear in perfect form in the final cut of the comedy. Occurring about 1 hour and 11 minutes into the movie, Cindy kicks the villain, Trinity style, and a bookcase is knocked over. You might notice that a floral vase is on a shelf in the bookcase. Yet, as the case tips over, the vase remains in its spot, glued to its shelf. Once this sequence ends, Cindy is hurled against the wall of the room. When she hits the wall, there doesn't appear to be any damage, but once she lands on the floor, a big dent shows up on that same wall. Good continuity people are so hard to find these days. Scary Movie 2 was released only a year after the first one. Right now, major motion picture franchises churn out content and a built-in audience regularly pays for it. Yeah, with DC and Marvel, we're pretty spoiled. And while around the time of the first Scary Movie in the year 2001, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings were releasing films one after the other, those franchises were planned far in advance to have multiple sequels. Scary Movie, on the other hand, was not expected to be such a success. While reviews at the time were relatively mixed, Dimension Films didn't expect it to attain a cult status from its young adult audience crowding the theaters. And so it's pretty impressive that the Wayans were able to put a follow-up together so quickly. The Wayans brothers may have been stretched thin when making Scary Movie 2, but the film was still successful despite the negative critical reaction. There's always a new horror franchise to spoof, so they weren't necessarily at a loss for ideas. That may explain why the Wayans were all ready to make a third film in the franchise. The brothers claim they went so far as to pitch their idea for Scary Movie 3 to the studio before it was taken from them and given to a new creative team. The style of the Scary Movie franchise is often compared to the hugely successful parody films of the 1980s produced by the Zucker brothers and Jim Abrahams. So, it makes sense that when Scary Movie 3 came around, the studio would rope in David Zucker to direct. As a result of the change in creative teams, Scary Movie 3 snagged Pat Proft as co-writer, who'd helped write some of ZAZ's previous hits starring Leslie Nielsen, as well as Police Academy and Hot Shots. Pat Proft wrote for some of the biggest comedy and variety shows on television in the 60s and 70s, including The Carol Burnett Show and The Smothers Brothers Show. He also served as writer on one of the most infamous specials to ever make it to air, the Star Wars Holiday Special. As co-writer, a guy by the name of Craig Mazin would go on to pen Superhero Movie, more Scary Movies, and in a wild turn of events, HBO's Chernobyl series. Good for him for really working projects as wildly different as one could get. As for David Zucker, it was later revealed that he didn't exactly get the Scary Movie directing gig because of his long list of successful comedies. Actually, it's because of a film that even he himself admits isn't too good, My Boss's Daughter. The producer called him up saying, "You're better than your material." And when negotiations broke down between Dimension and the Wayans, Dimension turned to Zucker to make this movie happen. It should be noted that David Zucker wasn't necessarily responsible for the My Boss's Daughter's script, and it makes sense that when brought on board for Scary Movie 3, he would bring his old writing buddy Pat Proft for the ride. As for David Zucker's post-Naked Gun writing credits, he didn't officially contribute to a Scary Movie script until Scary Movie 5. But he did write the cult classic Basketball with the co-creators of South Park, Trey Parker and Matt Stone. But enough about the creative team, how about the actors? So, you know that there was once a role intended for Marlon Brando? And no, the Wayans didn't just simply write that into the script. Marlon Brando enters as some kind of inside joke. They were actually able to wrangle a cameo appearance by Brando towards the end of his life. And the notoriously difficult actor, known for being one of the greatest screen performers of all time, actually showed up on the set of Scary Movie 2. Unfortunately, he was so sick that the Wayans weren't able to get a fully usable take. So the iconic performer ended up being replaced by James Woods. Look, Woods has logged some great performances through the years, but imagine what Marlon Brando's presence would have done for Scary Movie 2's 15% Rotten Tomatoes score. Since the Scary Movie creative team couldn't use footage featuring the actual Godfather, they settled for the Godfather of spoof movies, Leslie Nielsen. But let's face it, for Scary Movie 3, it was easy to get Nielsen involved once his old pal David Zucker took the director's chair. Nielsen, the star of Airplane and the Naked Gun trilogy, had been in a horror spoof of his own several years prior, Repossessed, which was a parody of The Exorcist featuring Linda Blair. In Scary Movie 3, Nielsen, an icon in the world of straight-faced comedy, would take on the role of the President of the United States. And he gets one of the better sight gags in that third Scary Movie. In one scene, he looks at a portrait of a former leader and asks, "I wonder what President Ford would have done." Only the painting isn't of President Gerald Ford, it's of Harrison Ford, famous for playing President James Marshall in Air Force One. Much like other successful parody films, the first Scary Movie models its plot after that of Scream. But that's not the only film it parodies. A major reveal in the first Scary Movie centers around the fact that Cindy, played by Anna Faris, and her friends ran over a man with their car. They go on to suspect this man as the villain who's wearing the mask and knocking off their friends, one by one. This is all a nod to the Sarah Michelle Gellar and Jennifer Love Hewitt classic I Know What You Did Last Summer. Anna Faris' character in Scary Movie goes on to say that if her life were a movie, she'd be played by Jennifer Love Hewitt, although she does change Hewitt's name into a euphemism referencing a certain physical aspect of the actress. Scary Movie 2 wasn't as well received as the first Scary Movie and represented a bit of a dip in quality for the franchise. While 2000's Scary Movie has 53% on Rotten Tomatoes, 2001's Scary Movie 2 only has 15%. And although 3 more sequels quickly followed against reviewers' recommendations, the Wayans brothers never intended for there to be a sequel. Marlon Wayans doesn't think it's as good as the first one either. He was quoted as saying, "What my brothers and I did was take a $19 million movie and we made it into a $500 million franchise. We got rushed to do a sequel. It was a little more desperate." Maybe Scary Movie 2 just wasn't as good as the first film when it comes to poking fun at horror movies. Scary Movie 1 gives a nod to The Exorcist when Cindy says she vomited slime after her first kegger. Then in Scary Movie 2, Natasha Lyonne, now a comedy icon in her own right,
I don't fuck with shoelaces,
played a possessed woman named Megan. The character's name happens to rhyme with Reagan, the name of Linda Blair's character in the original Exorcist. Sure, the sequence is just an excuse to ring a scene for as many vomit jokes as possible, but it does feature Andy Richter as a good priest and James Woods as a dark and twisted priest. While it's chock full of tasteless jokes, this sequence also serves as a reminder for what could have been had Marlon Brando's cameo worked out, with him playing the bad priest. While the Wayans brothers focused on spoofing horror films, they also squeezed in some nods to very unscary movies. In the first Scary Movie, these references include Election, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, American Pie, and The Usual Suspects. In Scary Movie, Heather runs for student government and gets on her teacher's last nerve, like Reese Witherspoon in Election. The climactic fight scene, which also includes nods to The Matrix, references the acrobatics in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon as well. The moment when Cindy and Bobby go to get, intimate, closely mimics the similar scene between Jim and Michelle in American Pie. While we all love a good rags to riches Hollywood story, Anna Faris really found her career going from 0 to 60 thanks to the Scary Movie franchise. According to the Wayans, many actors were considered for the role. Just a few years after the release of Clueless, Alicia Silverstone was a hot commodity in the film scene, and she was actually a top choice for the role of Cindy. However, Alicia didn't take it. Then came Anna, who shockingly didn't even have an agent at the time she auditioned. She impressed the creative team so much that they offered her the role, and Faris's career blossomed from that point on. It is practically unheard of for an actor to get cast in a major motion picture without representation, but this just goes to show you that anything can happen in Hollywood. The first several Scary movies were released in quick succession, but there was a pretty big gap between Scary Movie 4 and 5. Maybe they thought that they had checked off every major horror film that they could possibly parody. However, the filmmakers were inspired to get back behind the camera after a 7-year break in 2013. At the time, they decided to stay ahead of the curve by spoofing films that were so recent they hadn't even come out yet. In fact, the writers parodied the Evil Dead trailer because Scary Movie 5 was filmed before that movie's release. Actor Simon Rex confirmed that the screenplay was changing for scenes as they were filming them. Tori Spelling is Hollywood royalty. Growing up in an industry as the daughter of producer/TV icon Aaron Spelling, Tori made a name for herself on 90210 and the various Lifetime films she starred in since. Hot off the heels of her role in Scream 2, Tori was cast as Alex Monday in Scary Movie 2, but most of her role was left on the cutting room floor. Apparently, after she refused to do a particular adult sequence, and let's face it, the Scary Movie films are known for pushing the boundaries of taste, Tori says the production company cut down her role. Like many other successful parody films, the Scary Movie franchise features characters who often know they're inside the movie. It's usually as simple as characters being aware that they're acting out horror movie tropes, and this meta style shows up throughout the first Scary Movie. We see it when Brenda and Ray go to the movies. A trailer for Amistad 2 parodies Amistad, Shakespeare in Love, and Titanic, going as far as to include a character shouting, "I'm king of the world!" Brenda goes on to become an active audience member, maybe too active. She yells at the screen, then the audience, and ends up spoiling the plot to Big Mama's House, Boogie Nights, The Fugitive, Schindler's List, Thelma and Louise, and Jackie Chan's films. For all of the Scary Movies' attention to detail, and they do try to mimic the style of the films that they parody as much as possible,
Hey, fuck me! Ray, fuck me!
they also have their own share of moments where they miss their mark. One sequence from Scary Movie 2 is devoted to Cindy's stories of her possessed cat. At around Scary Movie 2's 34-minute mark, she shows the professor places on her arms and neck where the possessed cat scratched her. Shortly afterward, the scratches are nowhere to be seen on her body. In the moment when she actually fights the cat, there's cat feces in the litter box. It's later missing from the box, even though there's been no time for anyone to clean it out. With the character of Brenda, she's never really gone. As long as we remember her.
Hey, Cindy! Look! I want TV, y'all!
Also, she passes away and comes back to life several times throughout the franchise. We're happy she keeps getting resurrected because these movies would not be the same without Regina Hall. But it is worth noting that in Scary Movie 3, there's a scene where it seems like Brenda is coming and going even after she's met her end. During Brenda's wake, actress Regina Hall is seen with her eyes open and closed at various points throughout the scene. Even though she's supposed to be playing Brenda's motionless body, it seems as if the director didn't give her a definitive note on whether to open or shut her eyelids. In the rush to make Scary Movie 2, some extra bloopers made it through to the finished film. A couple of these are related to complicated continuity, but some are just plain sloppy. When Chris Elliott, who plays the man with the odd hand, serves food at the dining table, his real hand is clearly visible through a gap in his sleeve. We can see that he's simply holding a fake hand. Elsewhere, when Dwight lets his wheelchair roll in place to make that perfect screech, we may see the quote-unquote rubber being burned, but his wheels don't actually move. After all of Scary Movie's Matrix references, and with a fourth Matrix on the way, maybe the Wayans will eventually make a film that focuses on parodying the Matrix. Until then, we'll just have to settle for the Matrix spoofs in Scary Movie 1 and 3. In the third film, Aunt Shaniqua, played by Queen Latifah, is portrayed as a kind of serene, oracle-like character. Eddie Griffin plays her husband Orpheus, a nod to the Matrix's Morpheus. The role of the architect, in a nod to The Matrix Reloaded, is played by George Carlin in one of his last film roles. He tells Cindy that he's been watching her for years, but instead of it being a kind of creepy AI thing, Carlin's architect is pretty much just a creepy guy. At the time of the release for the first Scary Movie, Carmen Electra was a household name. but she was also hounded by the press in the wake of her marriage to Dennis Rodman. The Wayans brothers thought she would be perfect for the film, and she actually originally auditioned for Shannon Elizabeth's role, Buffy Gilmore. The studio, Dimension Films, had different ideas. They fought the Wayans against including Carmen in the film. While Shannon Elizabeth eventually won the role of Buffy, Carmen Electra was featured in the important cameo of a doomed girl, Drew, who's taken out by the bad guy at the beginning of the movie. Her name, Drew, is a reference to Drew Barrymore, who basically played the same role at the beginning of Scream. Scary Movie 4 doesn't really contain any references to notable superhero movies, but did you know that it was almost entirely devoted to superhero parodies? That doesn't exactly seem on brand. So the powers that be decided to make a spin-off instead, and this film was called Superhero Movie. The flick even featured Leslie Nielsen in an Uncle Ben-like role to Drake Bell's Spider-Man-like character. As we said before, the movie was written and directed by future Chernobyl writer Craig Mazin. With a 17% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, we can comfortably say that Mazin has come a long way. Did you know that Jared Leto almost starred in the first Scary Movie, playing the role of Bobby? It's kinda hard for us to imagine Anna Faris and Leto together, but hey, we're sure they would have made it work. Leto had some slasher clout, having recently starred in the horror film Urban Legend. However, Jared Leto turned down the role to really challenge himself and stretch his acting chops for the disturbing and memorable film Requiem for a Dream. While the superhero genre did eventually get lampooned in Superhero Movie, the studio was actually keen on getting the Scary Movie franchise to spoof another big hit at the box office. David Zucker revealed that the production company wanted him and his team to include a complicated parody of the Hunger Games movies, which were huge at the time of Scary Movie 5's 2013 release. Zucker wasn't able to find room in the movie to reference Katniss Everdeen, saying no matter how silly, goofy, zany, stupid, whatever you can say about these movies, people still need a cohesive plot. We don't see many of the Scary Movie actors in as many films as we used to, but one performer who works constantly is Anna Faris. Although she was plucked from obscurity to join the cast in the first film, it took some work for her to gain respect as a more serious actress. She revealed in an interview that her role in Lost in Translation helped her transition into a wider variety of work. Early on, while working on the first film, she was having a hard time gaining the confidence needed to play the part. Keenan Ivory Wayans advised her that there's no vanity in comedy. That piece of advice has helped her ever since. Will there be more scary movies in our future? Or has the franchise covered all the ground that a series of horror movie parodies can possibly cover? Let us know in the comments below. And stay tuned to ScreenRant for more videos like this one. We'll see you around.